before there was a town called Glass River, or Antrim Center, or even Antrim Township. This land already had a long history. For generations, the Looking Glass River, known to native peoples as Wabwa Ao Seep, served as a summer home, hunting ground, and burial place for Native American tribes. The Sauk are believed to have occupied the area before about 1790, followed by the Ojibwe or Chippewa, along with the Potawatomi, Ottawa, and Huron. Long before American settlers arrived, French fur traders also traveled these waterways and native trails, trading with local tribes throughout the region. They established seasonal trading posts and camps, making this area part of Michigan's vast fur trade during the 1700s and early 1800s. The traders called the nearby salt springs Saline, a name that survived long after the French had gone. Shiawassee County was said to be full of salt prior to being turned into farmland. As more American settlers arrived after 1829, many native families relocated to Big Salt Lick, a nearly 3,000-acre reservation west of present-day Byron. Today, it's better known as Nag's Place. And honestly, that's a fascinating story, deserving of its own video. This area also carried the scars of an even earlier conflict. During Pontiac's War in 1763, fighting spread across much of what is now Michigan. According to early county histories, when settlers later dug foundations in what became Antrim Township, they uncovered scattered human bones. Grim reminders that this quiet countryside had witnessed violence long before the first farms appeared. Then, in the 1830s, everything began to change. Michigan had just become a state, and inexpensive government land attracted thousands of newcomers eager to build new lives. Families cleared forests, built roads, started farms, and founded small communities. One of those communities would become Glass River. Alan Baird, a transplant from Detroit, but originally from New York, came to look for some land to buy. He and his brother-in-law, Lyman Melvin, had first stopped at the primitive log cabin home of Dyer Rathbum in Burns Township before visiting Antrim in May 1836. They sat down to rest on an Indian mound on what is now Beard Road. It was called the Indian Mound, but was actually a picturesque natural knoll. Melvin remarked that this is where he would like to settle, and someday to be buried here. He was. They returned to Detroit and recorded their land purchases, and returned in July with oxen, wagon, tools, and cooking utensils, and prepared their land for wheat. They built a small hut of bark from ash trees. The bark was cut in long lengths and pressed out flat and leaned against a tent pole. Marsh hay was used for bedding. While planting wheat in the fall, they heard the ringing of a bell, and they found they had two neighbors, Peter Cook and Alanson Alling, who had also recently purchased farms. Their other neighbors were Indians with whom they became quite friendly. But imagine how lonely Antrim was in the 1830s. One afternoon, Alan Baird was searching the woods for his missing cow when he heard the sound of an axe. Following it through the forest, he discovered another settler he'd never met before. The two men sat on a log in the middle of the wilderness and traded stories. That's how sparse the settlement still was. A humorous story now, but probably not for her at the time, is of Harriet Alling's mother, Beulah Price, the first white woman born in the township, who had climbed onto the roof of their log cabin to dry berries. While she was up there, a wandering cow knocked away the ladder, leaving her stranded until someone happened to come by. There wasn't really a road. A young man hauling lumber reached a swamp where the road was simply bare logs laid side by side across the water. He stopped, watched where previous wagons had gone, trusted his oxen, and crossed the floating-looking log roadway to Wright's Mill before returning the same way with a load of lumber. One resident remembered the forest fire years, which were probably 1856 or 1857. The smoke became so dense that people could hear wagons and oxen traveling the road but couldn't actually see them through the smoke. Around 1840, a sawmill was built. Soon afterward came a grist mill. Those mills changed everything. Where farmers gathered, businesses followed. Before long, there was a school, a church, a blacksmith, a general store, and eventually, an Odd Fellows Hall. This wasn't just a crossroads anymore, it had become a community. Originally known as Antrim, the village officially changed its name to Glass River in 1868, taking its new name from the nearby Looking Glass River. That might seem like a small change today, but in the mid-1800s, having your own post office was a milestone. Before the Antrim post office opened in 1849, settlers had to travel all the way to Howell, nearly 25 miles, to send or receive a letter. Depending on the weather and the condition of the roads, that journey could take a day or even two each way. Can you imagine that today? Spending 2 days just to pick up your mail or to have a sack of grain ground into flour at the nearest mill? Once the post office arrived, everything changed. Letters came here, newspapers arrived here, merchants ordered supplies here. Mail reached the village by stagecoach and horseback postal carriers, connecting this little farming community with the rest of Michigan and the rest of the country. For families living on isolated farms, the post office wasn't just a convenience. It was their lifeline to the outside world. As the village grew, so did the community around it. Church services were first held in the local schoolhouse around 1850 until the congregation could afford to build a permanent home. In 1875, the First Methodist Episcopal Church was completed at a cost of $2,700, a substantial investment for such a small settlement. The building measured 36 by 54 feet and featured a vestibule, a 12-foot square belfry, and an 85-foot spire that could be seen for miles across the countryside, and replaced the existing old Hinckley log schoolhouse, which had actually been dragged to its new location by oxen. The church quickly became more than just a place of worship. It hosted community gatherings, it marked weddings and funerals, and its adjoining cemetery became the final resting place for many of the area's pioneer families. In fact, the first burial there was a man named Mr. Lake, who was accidentally killed while helping raise a building in the neighboring township of Perry. At the time, Perry didn't yet have a cemetery of its own. Even local government found a home here. Before Antrim Township had its own township hall, officials held meetings upstairs in the Odd Fellows Hall. Another reminder that in small frontier communities, a single building often served many purposes. One detail that really caught my attention was Glass River's independent order of Odd Fellows Lodge. In March of 1874, before the lodge had even received its official charter, a group of local farmers and businessmen decided to build a meeting hall. They pooled $500, a considerable investment at the time, and constructed a 2-story building. The first floor was designed as a store, while the upper floor was fitted out as the lodge hall where members would gather for meetings. That tells historians something important. Tiny frontier settlements didn't build dedicated fraternal halls unless they expected to thrive. Glass River was never counted separately by the U.S. Census, so no one knows exactly how many people lived here. But by the 1870s, the village had its own mills, church, post office, general store, and an Odd Fellows Lodge with 57 members. Taken together, those clues suggest Glass River wasn't just a lonely crossroads. It was the center of a busy farming community that likely served several hundred people. The Odd Fellows themselves were one of the largest fraternal organizations in 19th century America. They were known for charitable work, caring for widows and orphans, helping sick members, and organizing funerals long before government safety nets existed. Today, though, they're often remembered for something else. Their meeting halls featured symbols that seem mysterious to modern eyes: skeletons, coffins, the all-seeing eye, and secret initiation ceremonies. But those symbols weren't meant to frighten people. They were reminders that life is temporary, that death comes for everyone, and that a person's character is what truly mattered. Even so, standing in an abandoned town, knowing those ceremonies once took place here, does make Glass River feel just a little more mysterious. Then, the world changed. The railroad came, just not here. Instead of passing through Glass River as everyone expected it to, the railroad bypassed it entirely. Business followed the rails, customers stopped coming, the millwright passed away and no one else took over for him. The mills quickly disappeared, the dam was removed. The post office closed in 1888. That single event was almost like the town's official death certificate. Families moved, businesses closed, buildings were abandoned, little by little. Glass River simply ceased to exist. Not overnight, but one empty house at a time. Today there are only fragments. The cemetery, the old general store and post office, slowly collapsing into the landscape. Stones for foundations and chimneys where homes may once have stood are now piles of field stones in a corn or wheat field. Perhaps cellar holes and foundations hidden beneath weeds, brush, and trees. Lilac bushes planted beside outhouses have vanished generations ago. If you didn't know better, you might drive right past without realizing an entire community once lived here. Hundreds of ordinary lives unfolded in this place, and now the fields are quiet. Interestingly, Glass River isn't famous for ghost stories, at least, not in the traditional sense. Although there are stories of cold spots in the woods and feelings of being watched near the cemetery, there aren't tales of phantom hitchhikers, or haunted hotels, or glowing apparitions. Instead, it's haunted by absence, standing among the cemetery stones, looking at the remains of the old store. It's difficult not to imagine the voices that once filled these roads. Sometimes the most unsettling places aren't haunted because something is there. They're haunted because everything is gone. So, is Glass River truly a ghost town? Absolutely. Did hundreds of people once call it home? Without question. Is it haunted? Places that history quietly forgot aren't necessarily haunted because of paranormal activity, but because of absence. Glass River creates a very specific Midwest ghost town feeling. Especially in winter or late autumn, places like this can seem almost suspended outside modern time. What do you think? Have you ever visited Glass River, or another forgotten town and wondered what happened to it? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoy Michigan history, ghost towns, and mysteries that are 99% true or not, don't forget to subscribe, because you never know what forgotten story we'll uncover next.